Hello. Come on in. I see some seats over here, a few over there. Come on in. Hopefully everyone had a great morning, a great coffee, great meetings. Hopefully we are fusing together. Thank you. I like you. Thank you. So to kick us off with our lunch session, we're going to be talking about higher education and how it has always been at the focus on the pursuit of truth. But that only works if people are actually free to challenge each other. So what happens when that breaks down? According to the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, more than half of college students today say that they self-censor on campus. For decades, Greg Lukianoff has been on the front lines of that question, defending free speech and pushing institutions to live up to their core mission. So let's give Greg a warm welcome. He'll be joined on stage by Olivia Eve Gross, founder and CEO of Studium, building new models of learning for a generation, rethinking how and where education happens. Let's give them a warm applause.
Hello, everyone. It is such a pleasure to be with you all. My name is Olivia Gross. I'm the founder of Studium. Our mission is to teach students what it looks like and what it means to agreeably disagree, something that we've totally figured out, right? And for that reason, it is such a privilege and a pleasure to be in conversation with you, Greg. When it comes to sort of the work that you are doing at FIRE, I would love to just sort of start the conversation in thinking about sort of, you know, for those who aren't familiar, FIRE formerly was the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education and is now the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression. Yep. And so I would love to know sort of what changed and to give some sort of context for the audience around sort of what the work you do is and why it is so important.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. How many people here know what FIRE is? Some of you, most of you don't. Okay. So FIRE was founded in 1999 by a right-leaning conservative libertarian named Alan Charles Kors and a left-leaning civil libertarian named Harvey Silverglate, who's my mentor. And we've been defending freedom of speech, academic freedom on campus since 1999. I joined way back in 2001. And even in 2001, I was shocked at how easy it was to get in trouble for what you said on a college campus. But around 2020, things got much more intense in the country for debate and discussion. Actually, it really kind of accelerated with Trump. And we decided that we had to expand beyond just campus. So now we fight for free speech both on and off campus. Right now I'm in court with Trump in his personal capacity, with Marco Rubio over whether or not you can just kick people out for their opinion. You can, like in the case of Ramesa Ozturk, for example, at Tufts. So we've grown to, we're about a $35 million organization. I have about 140 employees. But the unfortunate thing, and you never want to hear a First Amendment lawyer say this, is that business is booming for First Amendment lawyers at the moment. And that is not a good sign.
Yeah, wonderful. So I had the pleasure of reading your and Nadine Strausson's brilliant book, The War on Words, and which really did an amazing job breaking down the 10 arguments against free speech and why they fail. You know, we're obviously a biased duo when it comes to the importance for defending free expression. I'm really curious to hear from you why you think free speech has the branding issue that, you know, it tends to have, and why for young people, you know, there's this perception that it, you know, is warped.
You know, this is probably a rough thing to say in a group full of educators, but I do think that a lot of the quote-unquote branding issue with freedom of speech came out of K through PhD. When I was working at the ACLU back in 1999, I could see something happening, what I called the slow motion train wreck on college campuses in particular. I grew up, you know, we qualified for public assistance when I was a kid. And then I end up at a place like Stanford Law School, and this was definitely a very weird experience for me. And it was the first time I really ran into kids who were pretty, mediocre, a little ambivalent about freedom of speech. Working class liberals were very pro freedom of speech. I thought that's what made a liberal, but it was only when I started meeting kind of like more upper class people who came from, the 1% and tended to go to the fanciest schools that I started really running into this very anti-liberal kind of idea. And that's a very typical dynamic, that essentially once your politics become a supermajority of an institution, you go from, you want free speech when you're the minority, because free speech protects minority opinions. You don't need it to protect the majority. The popular vote projects the majority of power. And in higher ed, there was this intentional, clear shift that free speech started being problematized, partially because the people in charge of higher ed kind of thought, well, if I'm the one deciding, what will get you punished and what won't, I can be trusted with that. And that's the temptation of power always. And it's been very frustrating to me watch this slow motion train wreck happen and not being able to stop it. And what I fear, the situation that we're in right now, is that my dad's Russian, my mother's British. I spent a lot of time over there as a kid, and I was always talk about how America was just kind of different from other countries in that for the most part, other countries have a sort of ethno-nationalist, centralized power right, and a more socialist, Marxist left that also want centralized power. Both sides basically want government to have tremendous power over everybody. They just want it for different reasons. What made America so special was we all tended to be small L liberals. We believed in pluralism. We believed in freedom of speech. We believed in candor. We believed in this. We believed in it so much that Nadine Strawson, our friend and hero, the former head of the ACLU, when I was a kid, finding out that there were Jewish lawyers who were so principled, they were willing to defend the Nazis at Skokie. That was the most impressive thing I had ever heard in my life in a neighborhood full of kids who, like my father, fled totalitarianism. But now we're becoming just like everybody else, where both sides believe centralization of power is the future, and liberalism, the one thing that made this country so very different and very special, is receding. And I really think we need K through PhD to start to understand, again, how important and how rare liberalism is.
Yeah, so if there weren't enough tensions just when talking about the free speech conversation, I want to throw another tension in the mix, which is, we're here this year to talk about, the power of fusion, the theme of this year's ASU+GSV, what that means, what that looks like. One of the things when it comes to FIRE, the deep commitment to free expression that, you're talking about, at the same time, there's a growing push from a lot of leaders, some of which are your former co-authors.
Dear friends, yes.
Dear friends, to introduce concepts like age gating to protect young people. And so I'm really curious to hear from you about how you think about balancing civil liberties and these crucial values with the need to protect young people and students.
It's a great question. I'm the co-author of a book called Coddling of the American Mind with Jonathan Haidt, who's best known for a book called The Anxious Generation, that talks about how you should get phones out of schools and that the screen-based childhood is harmful. He made it, and he started on this path from working with me on Coddling of the American Mind. I do believe that for a subset, particularly of young women, phones have been a disaster, particularly in grade school. Like everything nasty about grade school is hyper increased if you have a phone to allow you to bully each other. At the same time, my biggest fear is expansion of governmental power. And right now, globally, governmental power is expanding in a way that genuinely scares me. So I believe, for example, get phones out of schools. Could not agree more. There's not a First Amendment or free speech issue with saying that we wouldn't let you have a VCR, a TV, a telegraph, we wouldn't let you have like all of these machines that are represented in this tiny little box, just because it's distracting, like when we were going to school. So the idea that you put your phone away at the beginning of school, then get it back at the end, I'm all for it. I heartily endorse it. But people need to understand that there is no way to age-gate social media without making an internet that doesn't have anonymity. We have ways of doing it that make it more secure, but no perfect way to do it. And there are a lot of countries who don't even want to make it secure. They want to know who is saying what on social media, no holds barred all the time. That should scare everyone. If you think, you have to remember this power. Always think of this power, to think like a civil libertarian, always think of the power that you want your best friend to have in the hands of your worst enemy or the least trustworthy person you know. So John Haidt, my dear friend, he, you know, like we're at odds about this. We still love each other very, very much. But at the same time, you know, I'm very publicly fighting the idea that we should be passing laws to restrict, like it currently exists in Australia, where kids 16 and under can't use social media at all. But it's an unprecedented level of control over the internet in Australia that's now required for that.
And in thinking through sort of the tension between civil liberties and the need to protect young people, I'm curious, you know, being at ASU+GSV, how you think about the responsibility that K-12 and higher ed have in particular in navigating that tension.
Yeah, I mean, I have seen a lot. My kids go to public school. I love a lot of public school teachers. I do think that a lot of the problems I'm seeing have come out of education schools, and I think that a lot of that needs to be the way we do education schools and higher ed need to be rethought. I think what we need to be focusing on in K through 12 is cultivating curiosity, intellectual humility, resilience, and maturity. All pretty old-fashioned ideas, really. But my 8 and 10-year-old, when they come back and report kind of what they're learning, it looks a lot more like what I warned about in Coddling of the American Mind, that we're teaching them something a lot more like, hey, why don't you think like anxious and depressed people, where you're in constant danger, you're not strong enough to live in the world on your own, you're less resilient than you actually are. All these terrible messages that John Haidt and I predicted back in 2014 will make kids more anxious and depressed, while at the same time being a disaster for freedom of speech and academic freedom in higher ed. All those predictions came true. And what I think we need to really think about is we need to introduce what I'm going to be talking about in my next book, structured friction at every level of the educational process. We need to teach people how little they know, how they should be intellectually open, how they need to take seriously the possibility they might be wrong, and it's okay if people disagree with you. That is the heart of pluralism. It's very well summed up in some old sayings we don't say as much anymore, but to each their own, everyone's entitled to their opinion. Walk a mile in a man's shoes before judging him. Don't judge a book by its cover. It's a free country. These are all things we used to say all the time that reflected a free speech culture that I fear we've gotten away from. But K through 12 can do so much to change that if it wanted to.
Yeah, I think, you know, this notion of creating spaces of friction for young people, and that not just being something to tolerate, but maybe even celebrate and reward,
well,
right?
to demand. I would go further. I mean, like, and this is one of the ways that AI can help, is if you have not asked AI what you're wrong about, in my opinion, you're using it wrong. And when I think about a model that can undermine the sort of what I would call sort of intellectual certainty culture, this kind of like simplistic, moralistic kind of thing that has led to people to the unprecedented levels of shout downs on college campuses, just to back up on something that you guys can actually make a difference tomorrow in. We do a massive survey. We do the largest survey of student opinion ever conducted. And we ask students questions like, is it acceptable to shout down a speaker so that the speech can no longer go on? Is it acceptable to physically block people from getting to a talk? And is it okay to use violence in response to a speaker? About 70% of students nationally thought that shout downs were pretty much okay, at least in some circumstances. About 50% of one said that they could block speakers, and about a third said that at least in rare cases, speech violence, you can respond to speech through violence. And I talk to people in higher ed, in K through PhD, and they talk to me like there's nothing they can do about this. You all have the power to send all the way down the line the message that those are not the kind of students we want. That is not a scholarly mindset to think that because I don't want to hear a speaker, none of you may hear them. So I think if the message goes down through K through 12, you can actually have a fighting chance of having a fundamentally different and better environment for actual dissent in higher ed. And if it keeps on going the way it's been, I mean, we saw the 2 worst years for shoutdowns in academic history in 2023 and 2024. This basically meant that a small minority of students was deciding for everybody else who they were allowed to hear. That is a great formula for dogma. It is not a great formula for education.
So on the note of formulas for dogma, I think one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about as it relates to AI is, you know, if we have a generation of young person that's used to talking to AI, we're actually seeing a different sense of dogma around the fact that AI is reconciling with all of these different viewpoints for the young people that are using it. And so on that same note, do you have any fear around whether the next generation will encounter less disagreement in how we think through the use of AI?
It doesn't have to. And I think that we can better teach people how to use AI. And FIRE, I'm very proud of FIRE. And one of the things that makes us different than other civil liberties organizations is we think about it from a philosophical standpoint, not just a political or legal standpoint. So our research department has sociologists, psychologists, all this, like philosophers, like people really thinking through epistemology, how we know things and why. So one of the things we've been working on with the Cosmos Institute, we've been giving spot grants to technologists all across the country to try to figure out ways to help improve AI for truth-seeking and for critical thinking. So like for an example of one of the things one of our people came up with, this very simple interface called a priori, where you do a search on any of the major AIs, you get an answer back, and then you get a little thing next to it that says, this answer made the following assumptions. And you can uncheck any of these to see what the answer would look like if it didn't make those assumptions. You can turn AI into an incredible tool for critical thinking. You can turn it into the structured friction you need in the classroom to point out why the professor might not know everything, or why the student might be wrong, or just to teach them to take seriously, again, the possibility that they're wrong, because let's face it, all of us are wrong about things all the time. So I see AI as potentially a boon if we use it right, and we have kind of no excuse for using it right, because all you need to use it right to some degree is just to ask it. Did I get this wrong? What were the assumptions that went into it? What would someone who disagreed with me say? In a way that sometimes you ask that of some teachers, and they're not necessarily going to have the best answer.
So in thinking through sort of the free speech framework, often assuming a well-informed, discerning individual, right? That's a central component of it. How do you reconcile sort of protecting free expression with making sure students, in the way that you're describing in the use of AI, are developing independent judgment?
Well, I do want to question this, though. I actually don't believe that free speech was based on people being highly informed and super responsible about what they said. That's not the way we think about human rights. And the founders believed in a concept called natural rights, which is where our idea of human rights comes from. It's this idea that simply we assume that people have basic rights. And that means, and there's a great old quote about, it's not a right if you can't abuse it, which I always liked. But here's my overall thinking on speech that makes my philosophy also a little bit different. We're supposed to have a scholarly mindset as people who are interested in higher ed. And what does that mean? That means we should be curious about what people really think always, because you do not understand the world in which you live unless you have a clear picture of what the person sitting next to you thinks. And I will tell you this much, particularly at a conference like this, and particularly in higher education, people aren't saying what they really think. Every time you do a poll, like when you have 70% of students, this is from a North Dakota State University study, saying that they would report their professors for offensive speech, and then when you ask them what the offensive speech is, It's actual political opinions on things, some of which, by the way, have good factual backing. That is a chilled environment. The fact that a lot of people in this room have probably gotten used to it is no excuse to put up with it anymore. You need candor. So one of the highest values of freedom of speech is just to know the world as it really is. You need to know what people really think to have any guess at all. And when students talk about, well, what if people have horrible beliefs? Do I really want to know that? And I just have to repeat to them, you are not safer for knowing less about what people really think.
And for the surveys that you were describing that are being done in higher ed, a lot of the work that we do at Studium has to do with this idea of students needing able to learn how to agreeably disagree earlier, right?
Yes.
Like, college is too late is a lot of the premise of the work that we do. I'm curious if you agree with that idea and where you see it.
I mean, that I love. Like, if I could wave a magic wand, and I think it would be good for the country, there are a couple different programs like I would do tomorrow if I had magical powers. One of them is every sophomore in the country has to do a formal debate in which they take the opposite side from what they actually believe. And here's the amazing thing about when we had to do this in law school is you see how plastic your own mind is you go in dead set to go into moot court, and I'm like, I'm totally right, it's the moral position, I hope I get this side of the debate, and then you get assigned to the other side of the debate. And at first you feel awful, I can't argue that side. But then you start studying it, and then by the time you're arguing in front of class, you're completely convinced you're right. That is something that makes it much harder to do what I think a lot of Americans are doing today, which is believing that our opponents are either stupid or evil, but probably both. It is that kind of intellectual humility that you should be cultivating early, and I think that having debates early is a great idea. I'm all for it. I'd love to learn, to watch people become better arguers. And also, I think one thing that I wish that is well beyond, and we really would require magical powers, I just kind of wish we could have more face-to-face meeting of people across class differences in the United States from different regions. There's lots of programs like this, and this is one of the reasons why, by the way. I have found, and in our research we have found, a lot of times bigger state schools have fewer free speech problems. Not exclusively. Indiana University ended up right at the bottom of our list last year, and boy did they earn it. But for the most part, when you do have this interaction with people from different classes and different regions, it does really tend to help prevent the kind of weird environment that I experienced at Stanford, for example. Lovely people, brilliant people to be clear, but a very upper-class groupthinky place. So I think higher ed can do a better job of getting people not to debate each other, but just to listen to each other.
Yeah, and that magic wand would, of course, include high school law review. Well, thanks so much,
very
Greg.
cool.
Wonderful conversation, and thank you all.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Olivia. We are going to quickly reset here, and then we're going to move to our next conversation, which is about the intersection of policy, talent, and innovation. And few people who have had a more direct hand in shaping that than our next speaker, Secretary Gina Raimondo. As U.S. Secretary of Commerce, Secretary Raimondo was at the center of efforts to rebuild supply chains, including overseeing the $50 billion CHIPS investment in domestic semiconductor and manufacturing, and then a $65 billion push to expand broadband access, all while rethinking how we prepare the workforce for this rapidly changing economy. She's going to be joined on stage by Jorge Elorza, who is helping to lead an important conversation about how Democrats reconnect education to opportunity and outcomes and overall economic mobility. So let's give them both a warm welcome. Secretary Raimondo and Jorge.
Secretary, good afternoon. It's great to be here with you.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be here.
Secretary, I'd love to just jump right into it.
Go for it. Jorge and I are friends. He was mayor of Providence the same time I was the governor, and we always got along. So it's such a pleasure for me to be here with him.
Yeah, it was great to work together, Governor. So 10 years ago, Democrats used to have a 26-point advantage over Republicans on voter trust on education. We were clearly the party of education. Today, depending on which poll or what you look at, either that has narrowed or we're underwater. How did that happen, and how do we get back on our front foot?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question. Listening to those statistics, it just makes my heart hurt. Neither of us would be here but for good education. And for that matter, good government services. And I don't know how you can be a Democrat and not be for opportunity, which starts with education, leveling the playing field, which is education, and having an effective, efficient government, which is public schools working. So, you know, how did we get here? You probably know we were chatting in the back and you were kind of educating me, how did we get here? I think it's a combination of things. You know, maybe we've spent too much time just opposing the other side's ideas, even if they're good ideas. And look, as an elected official, having stood for a number of elections, including hard primaries, sometimes it's hard to be a reformer because you're afraid of progressives or teachers' unions or public unions coming after you in a primary. And I think that's a crime. You ought to do what you think is right for the people you serve, especially the children you serve, without regard for whether you're going to get reelected.
Absolutely. Amen to that, Governor. So when I talk to people across the country and your name comes up, they always mention the work that you did around pensions. You are literally famous for what you've done around pensions. Folks here might not be fully familiar with what you've done around pensions. I'd love to ask you to share a little bit about what you did and how you did it. But even more interestingly, I see some parallels between taking on this big, thorny challenge, which is pension reform, and big, thorny challenge, which is ed reform.
Yeah. You guys are probably wondering why we're talking about pensions at an education conference. But it's interesting what the mayor says. I do think there are parallels. So very briefly, my first thing I ran for was state treasurer in Rhode Island. It's an elected office. When I became treasurer, I inherited a pension system which was a mess insofar as it was deeply underfunded, and I worried so much that it was going to run out of money. I worried my kids were in Barton Gregorian, a local public school at the time. Their first grade teacher was in her mid-30s. She was amazing, and every day at drop-off, I would look at her and feel guilty because I knew that 30 years from now, when she needed her pension, it was possible she wouldn't get it or she would get half of it. And so I led a huge effort to fix the pension system. And it was brutal politics. And in fact, it's quite similar, I think, to education, though you can check me, you guys are the experts. The actual solution was not hard. The math of it wasn't that hard. We knew what had to be done. We had to raise the retirement age, we had to change the benefit design. The math, write down the solution, not hard. Politics, leadership, very hard. Because politics being the way they are, when I came forward with reform, which I thought was in the interest of state workers, firefighters, police officers, and teachers, all of the folks who led those unions came after me pretty viciously. In fact, you know, it's the same playbook. I'm going to throw everything we have against you. You'll never get reelected, yada, yada. And it was brutally hard. So I took the case to the people, and I said, this is an everybody issue. This is not business versus labor. This is not the Chamber of Commerce versus labor unions. This is an everybody issue. It is in everybody's interest to have a well-functioning government. And by the way, as a Democrat, I stood for governments that work. I stood for pensions being there when people needed it. I stood for governments that balanced budgets and weren't bankrupt. In the end, we got it done. We got it done by huge margins. It was very popular. And today, the system is well funded. But it was very tough politics, and as you well know, I had a brutal primary for governor, but I won. But the thing is, I didn't really care if I won. You got to do the right thing, and I think a similar thing is at stake here. You all probably know what has to happen in K through 12 to make it better, to be there for the students who need it and deserve it. So we got to get to the business of doing it, having the courage and leadership, and just get it done. Because these kids don't have any other options.
That's right. So I want to get back to this. Really what you're getting at is political leadership. You have to make it a priority. I'm sure you must have had advisors or at least trusted people in the community telling you, don't take on pension reform. It's a political dead end, number of pitfalls. You know, the similarities are all there with education as well. Let me throw out some crazy, they boggle my mind, statistics. Today in Providence, where I was mayor, only 2.4% of high school seniors in traditional high schools can do math at grade level. Crazy. In Detroit today, 80% of fourth graders are reading at a below basic level. Below basic is the lowest level, 80%. At a certain point, you got to ask yourself, like, well, what are we doing here, folks? And the political incentives, it said, don't align for electeds to take on education and education reform. But you proved that wrong with pension reform. And I'd love to just hear your thoughts on the kind of political leadership it takes. And, you know, we have 36 gubernatorial elections this year. You've served your time, your 2 terms as governor. How would you advise them to lead on education?
Yeah, those statistics, it's so tough. As a mother, as someone whose life was changed by education, like those are heartbreaking. And every one of us should just ask ourselves, what are we doing wrong and how do we make it better? My advice to governors and any elected official is always the same, which is don't consider success being popular or getting reelected. Consider success as getting the job done for the people you serve. And I would say especially the least advantaged, because they're the ones with the least voice. Now, yes, everyone told me I was crazy. My own family told me I was crazy. And they weren't wrong, truthfully. They were not wrong. What I have done, not just with pensions, so many things in my political career, was, I guess, bad politics. It made it much harder to get elected governor or reelected. But I guess for myself, I didn't consider success being, you know, being popular or being elected or reelected. And I give that same advice to governors. I was chair of the Democratic Governors Association for a while. I was a senior person in the National Governors Association. It's like having these positions is a short time of having the power, influence, ability to get big things done. Don't waste that opportunity on trying to make yourself popular. Use the opportunity to be as bold as possible, to make as much change as possible in the lives of the people you serve.
Yeah, and talking about being bold, you know, it's often said that the definition of political courage is telling your side they're wrong when you think they're wrong, and agreeing with the other side when you think that they're right. And you know, there was a recent new federal law that was passed, a federal scholarship tax credit program. It was part of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, and so it requires governors to opt in. All but one Republican governor has opted in, and on the Democratic side, 1/2 maybe Democratic governors have opted in. And so we have this same dynamic. Have you, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the scholarship tax credit program. What are your general thoughts about it, and any thoughts about whether Democratic governors should opt in?
Yeah. So I don't know all the details, and from what I understand, it's still going through the rulemaking process. So I'm not going to opine on the precise details of this policy, but here's what I think. Like, in what we know in Providence, man, if I could have had more money go into after-school initiatives, tutoring, coaching, and all the amazing nonprofits that did that work, if there were a program that I, as governor, could have signed up for to enable that, I'm pretty sure I would have done it in a minute, regardless of whose idea it was. And, you know, for those of you who don't know me, I was governor between I was elected in 2014, and I served until 2021 when I had to leave to go to the cabinet, or when I was honored to leave to go to the cabinet. And so I was there in you know, Medicaid expansion, and I remember so clearly, none of the Republican governors at the time took the Medicaid expansion, because it was Obama's idea. So who lost? The people in their state. So, and it drove me crazy at that time. So I guess what I think is we have to get to a place, especially when the stakes are so high, education, healthcare, check your politics and just go with the merit of the idea. If this is an idea that will help the people you serve, I think you have to take a really hard look at it. And if you decide that it's the right thing to do for the people of your state and will deliver benefit, et cetera, even if it's tough sledding for your politics, I think you have an obligation to do it.
Governor, you've, of course, served as governor at the state level. You've served as Secretary of Commerce in the Biden administration. You have a unique perspective, not only on democratic policymaking, but on the politics of it all as well. There's been a lot that has been written over the past year and change about the Democratic brand, how we've gone wrong, et cetera. There's a lot that we need to work on, but from your perspective, I'd be very interested, whether it's education or beyond education, what makes you optimistic and what is making you hopeful about this moment that will either rejuvenate the Democratic brand or where you see, you know, opportunities for like real policy innovation to move impactful policies forward?
Yeah. Well, I mean, this conference makes me hopeful. I came to this event a dozen years ago, and it was a fraction of what it is today. So this is exciting. There's so many entrepreneurs, new ideas, et cetera. It's awesome. I guess when I think about, say, education or everything, what you do is awesome. The problem is it's too small of a part of the system. The reform, the innovation, the emphasis on effectiveness and outcomes is terrific, but that needs to be the system, not a small piece of innovation on the side of the system. And the system is run by government and politicians. And that's why I would encourage any one of you who are crazy enough to try it, to run for office, because we have to take what you have, the urgency, the creativity, the focus on outcomes, the willingness to be different, and, you know, put that into the way the whole system is run. K through 12, post-secondary, et cetera. And when I listen to the statistics that you said, and by the way, it's different in higher ed, but I mean, you know, 40% of people who go to college don't graduate, they have loans, no degree. We need major change. And without being too political, you know, I have a lot of problems with the current occupant of the White House, but his message fundamentally was like, blow it all up, right? The system is the problem, drain the swamp. Well, you can't really blame some people for that resonating with them when 98% of the kids in the public school system that you just referenced are below grade level. If I were a mother and that were my only option, I'd say blow that thing up too. So, but I believe in government. I would not be here without the GI Bill that sent my father to college, the only one in our immigrant family who got there, public buses, public schools, public libraries. So no matter how tough it is, you have to, now is the moment in this country with these statistics, with this divisiveness, America rises to the challenge in times of crisis, and we have one now. So rise to that challenge, forget about your own popularity, and push forward with urgency, because in these moments, it is our time to reinvent at the whole, the whole system level, so everybody has a chance to be successful.
So we have about a minute left, and I've always been like a member of the Gina Raimondo fan club, and that's because you don't just talk the talk, you walk the walk. She and I had lunch. This is after we had just gotten reelected to talk about education, and we talked about how do we turn around the Providence schools. I threw out an idea to her that was just way bigger than the conversation at the time, and instantly she was like, "I'm in. Let's do this." And we jumped in and we worked on it together. And I think that you're so right, Secretary, that it is about systems change. We need to think bigger, and this is a moment for big ideas. So one last big idea question. So a lot of folks are looking at 2028, and there's going to be a lot happening in politics. So if you were someone that was thinking about the future, where do you see opportunities for Democrats to resonate even deeper with average voters, or not average voters, but everyday voters that we've disconnected from?
You gotta meet people where they are and speak to what they worry about every minute of every day, not what you think is interesting. And what they're worried about every minute of every day is, can't afford my house, can't afford the gas, can't afford the groceries, can't afford my kids' college tuition. So what are we gonna do about that? Jobs, jobs, jobs. Is AI gonna take my job? Why am I paying all this money for my kid to go to college? Will they get a job? Every American deserves a chance to see them and their children in this economy prospering. And it's our job to paint that picture for them and make it a reality.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. That was excellent. All right, I'm really excited about this next conversation. I hope you guys are too. Quick show of hands. Who knows the brand Joe and the Juice? Okay. All right, keep them up. Keep them up. Anyone has been to Joe and the Juice? Have you gone on to build a $4 billion AI company? This next guy has. Really cool. Let's talk about Synthesia. Synthesia, which is now a 8-9-year-old company, so way ahead of its time, is used by 50,000 companies around the world, including Amazon, Microsoft, and Accenture, to take text and turn it into interactive training video in minutes. That text and that language is now transcribed in 120 languages. The company just raised capital at $4 billion. They're generating hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue. So here to help share the story about Synthesia, let's welcome Victor Riparbelli.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for that introduction. I don't think I've ever been introduced with my background as a juicer before. I'm not here to talk about juice today. Today we're going to talk about AI video. My name is Victor, I'm the CEO and co-founder of Synthesia. And today I'm excited to share a sneak peek into some of the products we're going to be launching this year, which is all about transforming the digital learning experience from being around consuming content to much more of being in conversation, of course, using AI. Before we get into the details of what we're building, I would love to just give you a little bit of a background on how we got where we are today. So back in 2017, I founded the company with two professors and my friend Stefan Mark Cuban was our first investor, as you can see here. And we set out on a very audacious mission to change how we create video. Not by inventing better cameras or better tools for collaboration, but by actually building AI technology that could replace the need for cameras, microphones, studios, actors, and all the things we need in the physical world to record a video. First, we thought we were going to make Hollywood films, and that got us very excited. After 3 years of trying to do that, we realized that the technology just wasn't really there. It was very immature, it didn't really work. And back in 2017, AI video was a pretty fringe and pretty crazy idea to most people. We had our big breakthrough in 2020 when we launched the world's first avatars. We realized that rather than trying to build for Hollywood, where the quality requirements were extremely high and people didn't really want to change how they created video, there was a big market of people who worked corporate jobs in big and small companies who really wanted to make video. And especially they wanted to make video for education and training and learning. And they wanted to make videos of people talking to the camera. And the avatar technology was the first time it was possible to simply just write a script and then generate a video based off that. Today, we've evolved into a full-blown AI video platform that owns the life cycle of how you create a video, all the way from idea to deliver that video to a final person. Avatars is essentially these kind of digital people. They can be based on a real person. You can create yourself in something like 5 minutes with just a quick photo. Or you can use a library that we have inside the platform of actors that you can use. You can customize them, put logos on them, and make them look like they're from your brand. And essentially what they did was just provide a way for people to create video without having to use a camera. And getting from that idea to a video turned out to be extremely powerful back when we launched it in 2020. We quickly realized that the people who were using Synthesia weren't really video experts. They didn't know how to use video editing tools like Adobe and all these things you have to train quite a lot for. Most of them were more PowerPoint users than they were video editors. And so we built a platform for those people. We made it really easy to generate with the AI models the actual videos that you're seeing up here, edit it by adding in animations, screen recordings, and all the things that make a video, collaborate with your colleagues, translate the videos into 120 different languages with a click of a button, and finally deliver that video in our video player, which is proprietary and supports things like interactivity. You can ask multiple choice questions in there and buttons and make the experience come to life more than just a normal video. Today, we work with 90% of the Fortune 100, with 700 people globally, and we've built a really strong business based on helping people make better video. This year, there's 2 things that's very exciting, and they of course all revolve around using even more AI to communicate with employees, students, or whoever you're making content for. The first thing we're launching is our new assistant. And you can kind of think of the assistant as being a video editor that works kind of like a real human editor. You give them a task through a prompt, and then you can iterate with them until you have a video that you're happy with. You can either just put in a text prompt, like you know it from most of the AI systems you use today. You can give it a PowerPoint, a PDF, a web link, or something else. We'll then take the content for you. We'll write a script, and we'll also design the video in your brand colors and your typography. It's actually getting so good that I think in the next couple of months, we're going to be able to create videos that are 90% done. We even generate motion graphics that are specifically made for that script, and it works phenomenally well. Once you've made the video, you can then chat with it, like you would chat with a ChatGPT. You can ask it to change something in scene 3, either the script or the visuals. And this essentially plugs the gap between who can make videos, right? What we really want at Synthesia is that everyone can make a video as easy as you can write an email or make a document or a slide deck. That gap is rapidly narrowing. The other big idea, the other thing we're launching this year is more fundamental around what a video actually is. When we founded the company back in 2017, we founded it based on 2 big ideas. The first big idea was that AI is eventually going to be able to generate content, not just analyze patterns in data, which is what most AI was used for back in 2017. Once we can generate content with AI, the marginal cost of creating content is going to drop to almost 0. Not just in how much dollars it costs to create a video, but also in the time it requires to create a video and the skills required to create a video. And those of you who've used Synthesia or some of the other AI video platforms out there, you'll know that we're right in the middle of this. You can literally go in, and in 5 minutes, you can create something that looked like it was shot by a Hollywood studio. That's very fundamental. That's a huge transformation in how we communicate. The other big idea was that when we as humans invent new media technologies, we always invent new media formats that go with those technologies, right? The media formats don't stay the same. And so for us, the question is, what would video look like if you had to invent it in 2026 with all the technologies we have around us now? We have large language models, which can provide us intelligence on tap. We have offline video models that can produce very high quality clips. We now have real-time video models at Synthesia, where you can actually talk to an avatar, like you were on a video call with an avatar, you can have a conversation, and so many other technologies around us. And the answer here is clearly not one-way broadcast video, where you record it once, and everybody watches exactly the same video. That's not how it would look if we were to reinvent it today. I always love to find analogies in history of where technology has changed how we consume information. And the one I always go back to is, if you think about physical newspapers, that's kind of what video is today, right? With a physical newspaper, you would make the newspaper, then you would print a lot of copies, you would send it out to people, they would all read the same newspaper, and the next day, they'd get the next newspaper. When we invented the internet and websites, the first websites, they kind of just looked like a newspaper on a screen, because that's kind of what we could imagine, right? As technologies evolved, as we learned how the internet and computers worked and what we could do with it, it turned out that websites and newspapers are very different, right? On a newspaper, or on a website, you can personalize the content to every individual viewer. With one click, you can access 1 trillion different pages. You can have a comment section, you can show video, you can show audio. It's a very, very different thing, a website, than a newspaper today. And the same thing is going to happen with video. This year, we're launching what we call video agents. Video agents fundamentally change how we interact with videos, and it takes it from being a one-way broadcast to actually being a two-way experience. Video agents can be inserted into the videos our customers create. You can combine scripted content with agents, and they can take on a whole bunch of different roles depending on what kind of content that you're creating. One of the first use cases we're launching is all around training. When we sat down and thought about how will training evolve and how does that intersect with this new video agents product, we found this study by Rice University, who said that there's kind of 3 key ways that we learn. It's about informing, demonstrating, and practicing. In the corporate world, we're pretty good at informing. We create lots of text documents you have to read, videos, now with Synthesia, slide decks. There's lots of content about what you should learn, right? We're also pretty good at demonstrations. We can go and watch live calls of other salespeople who've done it before, and we can kind of consume a lot of content that prepares us for the real world. But it's still very difficult to practice. If we take the example of running a sales team in a company, for example, when someone new joins a company, they consume a lot of content, and then they do go through some practice with their manager, where the manager will role play to be a customer, and you can try and have a kind of conversation. But obviously, that's pretty limited by the manager's time. So when we thought about where should we apply video agents first, we really liked this problem of helping people practice real-world skills with an agent. And so Skills is our first product that uses video agents. Skills is essentially a way for our customers to build interactive trainings, combining all the video technology we have in Synthesia today. We can create great scripted content. You can have quizzes, all the things you do in most learning platforms today. But you can also add in these agents that can have a conversation with someone. So if we stick with the sales example, what you can do now is when you roll out a new product, you can have people consume kind of the scripted content. Maybe that's 10, 15 minutes of video explaining the new product, the positioning, and so on and so forth. And then we can send them into a conversation with an agent. That agent can pretend to be a customer. And so you have to answer product questions. You have to overcome objections. You have to build empathy. You have to prove that you can set up next steps. And all the sales skills you need to be successful in real life. And because the intelligence layer is now so good, it's absolutely incredible how realistic this actually is and how well it works to practice your skills before you go out into the real world. We rolled this out for 3,500 sellers in one of the world's largest and most valuable companies recently. And seeing how people improve, even after just doing a role play 2 or 3 times, is phenomenal. So for the learner, it makes a lot of sense, right? You can practice. We all know that when you practice something in real life, you learn it better than if you're just reading about it. But for the managerial and executive layer, this is also very interesting because up until now, the way we work with our customers who create lots of videos for training is I can tell you that someone has watched the video, but I can't guarantee they've actually understood the content, right? For all it matters, it could be that they're scrolling TikTok while they're watching the video. Maybe the content just went over their head and they didn't actually get any of it. I can only tell you if someone watched the video. And that's the problem with a lot of training. I met with an executive recently who told me that the problem with training is that 50% of it doesn't work, but you don't know which 50% doesn't work, right? With this new product, because the way you set up a skill is you go and you define different skills, you teach the agent how it should evaluate it, you put in a prompt, we can actually begin to build a data set of your team, and we can show you how well enabled people are on an individual level, on a team level, or on a geographical level. That means we can surface insights, like what you're seeing up here, where our systems can look at all the data, all the learners, and they can tell you what are some improvements that you could make, what are you really good at. We can begin to build a graph over your teams and tell you what they're good at, what they're less good at. And this, of course, makes it much, much easier for our customers to deliver training exactly where they need, rather than just stroking with a broad brush. Skills is the first product that we're launching using this new video agents technology. But there's a lot of other use cases that we're very interested in that we're going to be releasing later this year. Things like doing interviewing of candidates, a first screening, where they talk to an agent, which can give them a case study and have a talk to them. We're excited about doing things like pulse service. You could go out with your team and you can actually interview them. Instead of just sending them a long survey they have to complete, they can talk to an agent for 15 minutes. I'm actually doing this with my own team right now, where we've built one of these agents, and everyone in my company is going to have a 10, 15-minute conversation with the agent. They're going to talk to the agent around how they use AI, how they would like to use AI, what problems do they have with using AI in the company. And then we can get all that information from all 700 employees in my company, and we can do that in the span of a couple of days because we don't need humans to interview them. And then we can, of course, also use large language models to summarize all those learnings and help me with a plan for how I can help accelerate AI adoption in my own company, right? So there's going to be so many things these video agents can do in the future. We're also going to be launching it as an API if you want to build your own app around a real-time avatar you can talk to. That's going to be a possibility. And I'm very, very excited for playing a part in inventing what I think is going to be one of the most important interfaces of computing in the future. Thank you so much for having me. Hope to meet a lot of you on the floor, and I hope to see you on Synthesia at some point. Thank you very much.
All right. We're going to keep it moving. Very quickly, I'm going to welcome to the stage Dominic Lichty, Global Education Lead at Apple, and Rebecca Winthrop, Director, Center for Universal Education at the Brookings Institution, for a fireside chat on bridging the engagement gap. Let's welcome Dominic and Rebecca.
Hi.
Hey. So great to have you here today, and I'm really excited about the topic we're going to talk today about it. And the topic really deeply matters to us. It's about like how we do ensure that every student is actually engaged in the learning, right? How do they make the real choices, prepare themselves for the future, and how do they succeed? And today we have actually 2 reports. We're going to talk about them. One actually, in both you're involved, so which is really cool. And the one report is from Brookings and Transcendent Education. It's about the disengagement gap, right? And you mentioned in your book, you have it with you today, and you're probably going to talk about it, the disengagement teen, that only 7% of students actually feeling resilient, confident, and engaged in learning. And hopefully we can talk about the 4 modes of students then, how we can address that they feel more engaged and more resilient later on. So I'd love to hear that from you then later on. The second report is also from Brookings, where you have a model, how we're navigating all the innovation and in technology and in education with the model of prosper, preparing, and protecting, and we'll hear for that very soon. And so I'm super thrilled to have you here again, and you have been a globally recognized expert in education and in technology innovation. You have done a ton of research across the world with over 500 institutions, papers, etc. So it's there's a lot on my list here, but also you have led the global task force on AI, a pre-mortem before the rollout of actually Gen AI. So wow, it's really nice. So let's dive in. So let's go with the first question. It's with the framework that you and Jenny Vanderson have developed, right? It's the 4 modes of student engagement, which is passenger, resistor, achiever, and explorer. So help us understand, why does this distinction really between modes matter so much?
Yes, well, thank you for having me, Dominique. It's nice to see everybody. So several years ago, my co-author, Jenny Anderson, and I went in search of trying to answer the question, why don't kids love school? Basic question. We know that 75% of 3rd graders say they love school, and then it just sort of takes a nosedive, sadly. 25% of 10th graders say they love school. And what we found is a real problem with motivation and engagement, student engagement. And we found that it wasn't as simple as kids are either engaged or disengaged. It was actually more nuanced than that. And we found kids show up in these 4 different modes of engagement. Passenger mode are the kids who are in school, attending school, but have dropped out of learning. They're doing the bare minimum, they're coasting along. They might love going to school to see their friends, but they don't really love going to school to learn. And the most common thing we hear from them is school is boring. They don't find a lot of relevance. Then you've got kids who are in achiever mode, and actually everybody loves an achiever. Raise your hand if you think you were an achiever. Yes, in fact, all of you probably are. You're being very shy. So these are the kids who are really striving to get good grades, and it's great if they're striving for excellence. We like that, but oftentimes kids start striving for perfection, which is impossible. And they get very fixated on the end outcome, which is their grade they get, and not on the learning journey, and are actually really fragile learners because they start being really risk averse. They say, oh, I'd like to write my essay on this topic, but I don't think my teacher will grade it and give me an A, so I'm not going to write it. Oh, this class looks interesting. I heard it's really hard. I might not get an A. I'm not going to take it. So that's not what we want in our kids. And the number one thing that kids in achiever mode say they hate about school is my teacher doesn't tell me exactly what to do to get an A. That really pisses them off. And again, that is not a good set of training for an AI world. Then you've got kids in resistor mode. These are the kids that we all think of when we think of quote unquote problem children, the classic disengaged teen, resisting, avoiding, learning. They can be very difficult, it can be very hard, they may be going through a lot of mental health problems. But really what we found is these kids actually have got something going for them. They've got a lot of chutzpah, they got a lot of gumption, they actually have a lot of agency. It's just pointed away from their learning. And they're often using their voice or the behavior really inappropriately, but to signal that school isn't working for me. These are the kids who say school isn't worth it, it feels like a prison. Literally, kids have told us that. I don't feel seen, I don't belong here. But we found that if you can change the conditions and give kids more autonomy, more relevance, more opportunities to apply their learning, the kids in resistor mode can move to explorer mode much more quickly than the kids in achiever mode. And the kids in explorer mode those are the ones that are really being prepared for an AI world. They're the ones who are really resilient. So they're the ones who come home and say, Mom, before you say, how was your day? They'll be like, can you believe? And then they just start talking about something they've learned. They're super excited and animated, and they're into the learning journey, not just the outcome. So they're the ones where if they don't do well on a test, they say, oh my gosh, well, why is that? What can I do differently? So knowing those modes is really important when we think about how to prepare kids for an AI world and what we have to do with and without technology in schools to help kids really learn well.
Yeah, these 4 modes are very, very interesting. I was just reflecting as well while you were talking. I was like, oh yeah, I've been also moving between like the different types of modes, right?
That's super important. These are states, not traits. They're modes. And kids do move between them. We found a lot of kids in passenger mode in school and in explorer mode outside of school. The problem is when kids start getting stuck in one of the modes, either resistor, passenger, or achiever, and they start thinking of it less as a mode that they're in and more as an identity. I'll give you an example. We had one student who we interviewed who was a boy in 10th grade. He was reflecting back, and he said, you know, in 8th grade, I just pretended. I didn't know what was going on in school, like to be cool. Like, I don't know when the test is due. I don't know when the homework is due. And he said, now in 10th grade, I really don't know what's going on in school. Like, I can't figure out how to study and organize myself. And so he had somehow slipped into this identity without even meaning to.
Do you see that, this is a side question as well, like from elementary going to middle school, high school, is it different, or are they always like shifts?
Yes. We actually tracked the 4 modes across grade levels, 3rd through 12th grade. Okay. And there's a lot more achiever mode and explorer mode in elementary school. And the big dip we see when all of a sudden a lot more passenger mode, a lot more resistor mode, and much less explorer mode is when kids start middle school. Wow. So less than 4% of kids say that they're regularly having explorer mode experiences in school between 6th and 12th grade. Wow. Wow.
So we have a new tool in our toolbox in education, which is AI, as everyone knows, right? And the question is like, it's going to be kind of like pivotal over the next few years, like how are schools going to use that, right? Do they use it to transform like learning, or they're just substituting what they have been doing, right?
Right.
So, what do you see like globally? What's kind of like when you did recently like a review risk of like AI and the benefits in AI in education. So how do you see this playing out?
Yes. So we just finished a big exercise. I led the Brookings Global Task Force on AI in education. And the idea was really to learn from what happened with social media. And we, all of us who are educators, who know about child development, our parents, you know, we could have told you a decade ago when social media rolled out that things like social comparisons in adolescence can be very toxic if not done well. And so we want to make sure that people who care about kids, educators, child development specialists, all of us are at the table when AI rolls out. So that was our idea. And we were basically asking, you know, are we headed in the right direction? What are the potential risks? What are the potential benefits? And how do they stack up? And it was a really large study, 50 countries, had a big global group of experts involved. And ultimately, we found that if we just don't do anything, as currently we're heading, the risks are overshadowing the benefits. And that is largely because, not because there aren't good benefits, there are good benefits with narrow AI use, strategic AI use with vetted content, where teachers can use it very effectively, when it unleashes good pedagogy in the classroom. That's all very helpful, especially for neurodivergent kids. But that's not how a lot of kids are using it. They're using what we would call wide AI use. I'll give you an example. One student we interviewed a ton of students and teachers and parents for this study, said, well, he was a high school student in the US. My school banned ChatGPT, but it's not a big deal. We all just go on Snapchat or Meta AI. We go to social media, take a picture of our homework, and you know, it does our homework for us, and we turn it in. So it's everywhere. So wide AI use is like really unscaffolded, unsupervised, long conversations with AI companions or commercial AI chatbots that aren't designed for learning and not designed for kids and aren't necessarily safe for kids, that can really undermine their ability to develop critical thinking, to develop effort and persistence, and undermine their ability to develop interpersonal relationship skills. And when you don't have those things if you can't be an independent learner and you can't take feedback, because a lot of this AI companions and commercial chatbots are very sycophantic, so always agreeing with you, and kids develop their emotional muscles based on their experiences. Currently, 1 out of every 3 teens in the US say they prefer talking to an AI friend than another human being. So how do you take feedback in the classroom? Work with peers in group projects. So that's why we're saying if we don't do anything, the risks currently will overshadow the benefits.
So how did you choose then that preferable AI kind of moment, like the right application for it? Because it's like, it's just not typing in like an AI tutor or like a ChatGPT, whatever it is, right? Like what do you need to get out of it? There's probably like a different level what they need to learn, right? It's like from a critical thinking perspective that they don't know what they have to put in, right? It's like, and you have a model there with the 3 Ps, the prosper, prepare, and protect. So
very good.
I would love to know more about that.
Yes. I mean, ultimately, our conclusion was, this is not too late this is very early days in AI. We can absolutely move from an wide AI use that diminishes learning to a more narrow, strategic, intentional AI use that can enrich learning. And really, there's a bunch of things that need to happen, but it's really 3. The prosper is we need to, and all of us who work in education can do this today, shift our teaching and learning approaches so that they can't be hacked by AI, right? Much more oral presentations, knowledge acquisition. We still need content learning. We still need young people to learn how the world works and history and math and all these things, but they also need to be able to apply that knowledge to do things. And that combination is very hard to sort of short circuit just, by putting an essay prompt into a chatbot. So there's a lot we can do to shift teaching and learning in schools. The second thing we need to do is prepare everybody in the education ecosystem, students, teachers, school leaders, families, for an online world. Every student learns biology to learn about the living world, and yet young people spend a lot of time in the online world. It's time that we teach them how the online world works. Holistic AI literacy, which teaches not just prompt engineering, but the ethical dimensions. How do you create new things with AI? How do you design AI? Really gives student agency over AI as a tool to solve problems in the world and understands the limits is really important, and especially for educators. And then we would say the third thing is protect. There's a lot that needs to be put in place in terms of safeguards, especially for data privacy, all sorts of content, emotional manipulation. Like, those are all really bad things. We don't want our kids exposed to that. And so we need to put safeguards in place. And, legislation can do that. This is, I think, one area that there's broad agreement, maybe the only area at the moment in Republicans and Democrats, but that, kids' safety with AI is important. And our districts can do that through their procurement policies.
That's great. It's one thing that really stands out for me, what you just said, is like, it's not just prompting, right? It's really that fostering that critical thinking of students and really fostering that curiosity again with different type of set of questions that we need to ask to get the response what they need then at the end, right? It's a different kind of skill set what they need to learn this time. Shifting a little bit, you have been examining the education system for quite some time, and then also in collaboration with John Sent as well. And one framework that stood out there is kind of like, it's called the 6 Leaps Towards Extraordinary Learning for All. And it's really about like, it talks about the experience and how we can connect to experience and not being disconnected to experiences. Like, can you talk a little bit more about this? 6 levels, so it's like whole child focus, connection and community, high expectation with rigorous learning, relevance, customization, and agency. You mentioned that earlier as well. So I'd love to hear a little bit more like about this research design.
Yes, so these 6 leaps are great. They come from the nonprofit Transcend, which is a partner of ours at Brookings, and they're really evidence-backed. And to me, they embody, they're one of the frameworks, there are others, the real shifts in sort of the fundamental design of teaching and learning. I think what I worry about is us as an education community taking on generative AI and overlaying a transformative technology onto an education system that is currently not a transformative system. And that is a bad combination. And so really, I think this could be a moment where AI is, provides a real catalytic effect to redesign the teaching and learning process. And I would say we should focus on the pedagogical core, the instructional core, how teaching and learning happens at the classroom level, because that is the engine of school transformation. And redesigning those experiences should be central. And so Transcend's framework shows you how to do that. So it would be things where, for example, say you have a courtyard in your school that is too hot. Kids can come together, science, maybe biology, thinking about plants, and they can use math, and they can try to figure out how to reduce the heat of the courtyard. And you're still learning knowledge, but you're applying it, using it, which will embed it, help with transfer, which is something we need, and it's relevant. So kids are more motivated, interested, engaged, and they feel like they accomplished something. So giving kids the tools to practice agency is a way to build agentic citizens, which is another thing that we really want. So, transforming teaching and learning is not just about an individual child learning better. It is that. But it's also about making sure that schools will continue to play, and maybe, even in a bigger way, a community role. Especially in a world of AI, schools are one of the main places that young people get to meet other people not from their family or neighbors, right? They are building the practice of being good citizens, of learning to live together, which is something that's really important.
That's cool. Really like the interdisciplinary part of it as well, right? It's like, it's going to be key. And student agency is also different from personalization, because personalization is more to consume, the system tells you. The student agency is like more about them, they're the creators, they're like enabled for voice choice.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of like one of the key distinctions. But listening to this actually requires a new type of like educator maybe. Like, can you talk about like what's the shift of an educator gonna be in the future?
It's really hard to sort of support student agency in your classroom if you don't feel like you have any agency either. So as much as we need students in Explore mode, we need teachers who have the mindset to be explorers. And what better way to do that than exploring the world of AI and its limits? And we talk about in our big task force, we say we need new pedagogy that is AI aware. So don't assign something if it's going to be hacked by AI, AI assisted. So where pedagogy can be very helpful for AI, again, especially for neurodivergent learners, and AI resistant. Like there'll be spaces and places where we don't want AI in kids' lives. They need to learn to think before they learn to prompt, for example. And teachers need to be able to chart that. And so we do need educators to feel free to explore, to be excited to explore, and feel supported to explore. So it's also about the conditions around them.
Yeah, there's probably also a lot of facilitation going on, like being a mentor, coach type of situation in this whole thing. So what is the most urgent action right now, like for all of us?
Oh my gosh. Well, in our AI Task Force report, you can go on the Brookings website, brookings.edu. I do a weekly LinkedIn newsletter that I'm taking little bits of our recommendations each week. But the one thing I would say we should do, if there was only one thing, and it's very practical, you can do it tomorrow, is I think each school should have an AI council that is run by students. It's an AI student council. Yep. We had a co-author on our report that was a high school student, and we talked to a lot of students, and they are so eager to talk about AI, to partner with teachers about AI. And they said, look, we could check out assignments and tell teachers how to adapt it so we can't get around it with AI. We could beta test products that the school wanted to buy and see if they're good or helpful. We could look at procurement contracts. It's our data. We should be able to look at that. We can go train our families and our parents about AI use and how to, set regulations. So student AI councils, A, it promotes student agency, but B, it can possibly shift that sort of teaching and learning dynamic, as I know I teach to you, as let's co-explore together, which is, I think, going to be essential as we move forward.
I love this idea. Thank you, Rebecca. So we have the technology, we have the framework, we have like the knowledge itself, right, to create the learning environments where the students actually need to be, that they feel more resilient, more engaged, and more confident in the learning. So, and move towards that explorer mode instead of being resistor, or actually shifting a little bit more towards that explorer. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you for
being here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dominic. Thank you, Rebecca. So before we get into the final portion of our lunch session, I just wanted to throw out some pretty impressive stats. 1, in the 90s, we needed the entire internet to barely move a gigabit per second, and now a single fiber can carry terabits. 2, global internet traffic has grown more than 100x in just 2 decades, and it's still accelerating. 3, we generate more data every 2 days than the entire civilization created up until the early 2000s. 4, training a top AI model today uses more compute than the entire internet did just a few decades ago. And 5, despite all of that, more data, more compute, more connectivity, productivity growth has actually slowed. So here's the tension. We have more technology than ever before, and yet not the outcomes we expected. And that's where our next speaker, George Gilder, has been a contrarian voice for decades. George was one of the earliest thinkers to predict the central role of bandwidth in shaping the modern internet, and a founding investor in companies like Qualcomm. He's a best-selling author, and he has spent decades advising leaders on where technology is headed and challenging how we think about what actually drives innovation. Along with Rich Carlgard from Forbes, please give a warm welcome to George Gilder, who's going to answer the bigger question: have we been betting on the wrong things? Please welcome Rich and George.
George Gilder is somebody I regard not only as a good friend, but really my career mentor. Steve Forbes hired me in 1992 to start a technology magazine, and he made it very clear that we were going to build it around George's thinking, and which I just was delighted to hear from Steve Forbes. So George came into the technology world through economics. He wrote the most influential public policy book on economics called Wealth and Poverty in 1980. It really was the philosophical underpinning for what became the Reagan Revolution, Jack Kemp's supply-side economics, and so on. And George always goes against conventional wisdom. And that's why the conventional wisdom was that by the end of the 1970s, a kind of lackluster decade economically, is that capitalism was exhausted. And George showed that it wasn't, because it really came down to the agency of creative people doing creative things, and they responded to certain incentives. The same thing, the blockbuster piece that George wrote for our very first issue of our Forbes Technology magazine, Forbes ASAP, blew to kingdom come conventional wisdom that wireless bandwidth was inherently limited. You could only drive so many bits through the air, and that was pervasive thinking. George wrote this piece called Into the Fiber Sphere, promoted a company called Qualcomm, drove Andy Grove of Intel nuts. Andy summoned us to meet him and proceeded to tell us how wrong George was over the next hour that we had Andy's attention, that simply Qualcomm's technology wouldn't work, and that, that the air was not a good medium for broadband technology. Of course, today we all we're dependent on Wi-Fi in rooms like this where not only one of us, but hundreds of us and thousands of us can get pretty much all the bandwidth we need. We can watch videos and everything else. So it comes at a great time when there's all this fear and loathing and skepticism about AI, that George is going to bring us some conventional thinking over the next 15 or 20 minutes on that. So I want to put this to you today. Today, just as we were backstage, there was a news flash. And the news flash was that the guy who took a Molotov cocktail and threw it at Sam Altman's home in San Francisco, that Sam Altman is the leader of OpenAI, as you know, said, I want you all to consider this a warning, all AI CEOs and investors, a warning that this is Luddism carried to a violent end. So George, why do you think AI is not generally playing with the American population as well as it should? And why is there this violent minority, but a significant minority of people who seemingly will go to any means to stop AI? How do you
people
address
have been convinced that AI will destroy jobs. But AI makes people more productive. People don't get employed because they're unproductive. AI will make people more productive and thus more employable. It will create more jobs with greater wages and pay, and it'll revitalize the world economy. Last night I went to a dinner with a group of you, and I was told that this is a Gutenberg moment. And that is really true, that this efflorescence of AI is comparable to the original distribution of printed books 500 years ago. And printed books transformed the economy, created more of opportunities, spurred the expansion of the world's population from under 1 billion to 8 billion. It was a tremendous boon for human beings. And I think that AI will be a similar boom, but it's not going to be concentrated AI, a singularity in some gigantic data center. It's going to be distributed. And my current theme is the end of microchips, that the NVIDIA data center of today with millions of microchips all interconnected with optics and copper sheaths that weigh tons, and chips evolving into chiplets and two-dimensional schemes changing into three-dimensional and four-dimensional. I think we're having a wafer-scale revolution that will obviate chips. And a company called Cerebras just made a deal with Sam Altman. I think it was $8 billion. And Cerebras does what's called wafer scale. And wafer scale is, rather than taking the wafer and printing hundreds of chip designs on it and then slicing it into hundreds of die and then sending the die to the Philippines to be encapsulated in plastic packages and then transmitted to Foxconn in China to be incorporated in printed circuit boards before it comes back to the US to be made into computers. All that whole process will be limited because this 12-inch die won't be broken up anymore. It's a new integrated circuit. Cerebrus has 4 trillion transistors on this 12-inch die, and it's a moment as significant as Bob Noyce's invention of the microchip, the first integrated circuit, way back in the 1970s. And we're now in an era of wafer scale where you can have a data center in a box.
Well, one of the things that seems to be a possible solution to one of the other big complaints that people have about AI, in addition to job destruction, is that it will suck up all the available electricity at the rate it's going. We just came back from our Forbes Global CEO conference, and the consensus among people at least in Asia, this conference was in Jakarta, was that whatever the global GDP growth rate is going to be over the next 10 years, 3%, 4%, pick a number, the electricity demand will be 3 times that. Yep. So electricity demand, largely because of AI and because of the electrification of so many processes, is just going to go through the roof. Therefore, it becomes a price competition between the Amazons and the Microsofts and the OpenAIs, which are richer than Croesus, and ordinary small businesses and people. If that were to happen, that would be kind of a difficult issue to deal with. But does Cerebrus sort of take that off the table? Isn't it a much lower power per unit of compute design?
Yeah, I mean, I think that a wafer scale is much more efficient. You don't have to have these towers of interconnected chips. You have a single wafer, and with 4 trillion transistors all inscribed on the wafer. And so the connections, rather than being copper wires, they're traces on the silicon with the memory integrated with the logic. So it's far more efficient and radically reduces the energy costs of artificial intelligence. But it will also make artificial intelligence much more useful to all of us. And so historically, as technologies become more efficient, more energy efficient, they use more energy because they become more pervasive and they become more useful. So I think this is a great moment of transformation and opportunity, and I've developed my information theory of economics based on the translation of computer science into economics. And the essential thesis is that wealth is knowledge. As Thomas Sowell explained decades ago, the Neanderthal in his cave had all the physical resources we have today. The difference between our age and the Stone Age is entirely you folks, the growth of knowledge. And that is, knowledge is wealth, and growth is learning, and it's regulated by money as time. And there's William Nordhaus of Yale invented time prices in the 1990s. And applying time prices, we see that real economic growth, measured by the number of hours and minutes that a typical worker has to spend to gain the goods and services that sustain his life. Prices have been radically dropping for the last 50 years. And while the population has increased and knowledge has expanded and fed by new information technologies, defined by information as surprise, unexpected bits. I think that key in education is transcending the left brain focus of the AI movement, concentrating exclusively on logical and linguistic mathematical capabilities, and a move to right brain, which is the creativity, imagination, and intuition, spatial awareness, all these capabilities which the AI theorists seem to deny are important. They have a kind of singularity of the left brain, but it's the right brain that really generates the new knowledge that fuels a new economy. And your job is really to cultivate these right brain capabilities that result in new knowledge and new wealth for the world.
So you think the AI revolution will be good for creative, imaginative people, because it sure looks, the last 40 or 50 years of the technology world, it's been the 800 math SAT people who have run away with all. Yeah, literally, if you take the 5 most valuable companies in the world, starting with NVIDIA and Apple and Microsoft and so on, at least one of the founders of all of those, of the top 5 companies, scored 800 on their math SAT. And Larry Page scored, I think, a 740 on the math SAT.
Who did?
Larry Page of Google in eighth grade. So it would be I think people see AI as accelerating the trend where if you're the 800 math SAT people, you have a brilliantly gifted logic and fast twitch logical brain, it's going to be good. But for creative people, for Daniel Kahneman, slower thinkers, maybe not so good. But you believe the opposite. You're really contrarian on this one.
I believe that the right brain is the heart of enterprise and the creation of new knowledge, not the filtration of old knowledge in large language models with randomness to simulate creativity. Creativity isn't random. It's right brain intuition and imagination and creativity in the image of our Creator.
So it should be the efflorescence of the sort of the Mozart kind of brain, the creative brain. That was not an imitative brain. That was an original brain building on the shoulders of giants, but still an original brain. What becomes then? My theory is, for what it's worth, is that the most valuable thing we can teach people in school today is how to query. Is how to engage with AI. And query, for which you need language, you need to know what you need to be able to ask questions and guide the AI. That takes, some people can do that intuitively, but it seems like it's undertaught. I always thought, people today I know still can't do a Google search to save their ass. you know, and it always shocks me that people, you know, how difficult can it be? But it is difficult and that means that the stakes with AI and learning how to do good queries, how to translate your imaginative curiosity into a good query to help your savant friends out there, you know, seems to me under-taught among teachers.
Yeah.
We are, I wish we had more time, but we don't. I mean, George, look George up. George, his body of work is truly astonishing. He belongs on in any Hall of Fame of economic thinkers and technology thinkers. Thank you very much, George Gilder.
Well, thank you, Rich. I appreciate it.
Thank you, George. Thank you, Rich. That concludes our lunch session, and then we'll look forward to seeing you tonight. Everyone enjoy the afternoon.
We're going through one of the most empowering moments in the history of humankind. Is it scary? The truth is, danger and opportunity are opposite sides of the same coin. Either way, there's no denying a grand act of fusion is in progress. Man and machine, physical and virtual, learning and earning, all coming together to propel opportunity to infinity and beyond. A compression of the physical, digital, and biological so mind-blowing it's hard to fathom. It's the arc of learning bent back on itself until origin and outcome are indistinguishable. Of course it's scary.